Hello again. I'm excited to announce we are doing a new ELLI series. It's called the Designer Series. And I'm excited because we're going to touch on a topic that means a lot to me. I love plants. I love nature. My degree from college is in botany, and I'm not trying to make you botanists, but we're going to talk about plants today, and the topic's called Understanding Plant Forms and Morphology. So let's dig into this. This is going to be a three-part program. There's three different topics that will include underneath this plant forms discussion. So this is part one, and let's discuss form and morphology. I know this might be a little dry, a little bit boring, but just understand that you need to understand these terms and the concepts so then that way you can apply it towards good lighting design. Form, the plant form is basically what the shape is. The shape of the tree, the shape of the plant, the shrub, whatever it is. Morphology is the study of shapes. So, and it's based on solid shapes, shape forms. So if we look at this next graphic, you're going to see here that we've got tree forms on both sides. There's two different graphics combined here. So what it's showing you is the basic general shapes and what they call them towards the form. So you have round, spreading, pyramidal, oval, conical, vase, columnar, open, weeping, irregular. There's different terms that are used to describe these general shapes, and what I want you to do is to get used to learning to see these shapes when you're actually out on a job site. So in the upcoming slide here, you'll see in this graphic, the picture on the left is the trees that are in front of some homes, and this is what we typically see. And obviously some of this is in the winter time because you can see some deciduous trees in there with no leaves. But look at the next picture over to the right, and I've highlighted in a colored pen on each one. You can see the basic forms. So on the left in red is the pyramidal shape. And then on the right is the green, which is more of a vase shape or kind of a globe shape. And this is what I want you to get used to visualizing when you actually show up on a job site, when you first approach design and you're looking at these shapes. Because why is this important? It's because we're going to learn how to convert these shapes or to illuminate the shapes, because that's our trade. So on this next slide, it's the same thing. It's another similar image as before. You can see a series of 3 or 4 trees, and then I have the basic shapes defined onto the right side: pyramidal, oval, and vase again. So I just asked you this question. I said, why are plant forms important? And it's by understanding the form that we can more effectively locate lighting fixtures to illuminate them. And by understanding the plant characteristics, which I'll get into here next, we can expect to know what to see for growth habits, for seasonality, for changes that are going to take place, whether it's evergreen or deciduous, where it loses leaves, the color changes throughout the year, and then how big or the plant form will get. These are important, again, for lighting guys. Okay, so next slide here is general plant parts. We want to look at, there's 4 basic plant parts. There's the crown, which is the canopy or the head of the tree at the top where all the leaves are contained. There's the branches, that's builds out the basic form of the tree. And then the main trunk or the trunking. And then the last one is obviously the roots, but we don't do anything with that. We don't need to worry too much about that, except for on the side of knowing how roots work in soil. So then that way, if you're working in hard pan or cobble soil, bad soils, what will typically happen is roots will tend to grow more towards the surface, which can be problematic if you're doing well lights and any basic ground lights that it's in a real rooty area. You're going to have problems. So we talked about a minute ago evergreen versus deciduous. This is an important part of botany. You need to understand these changes that can occur. Evergreen means that it's going to stay green and leafed out year-round. Versus deciduous, obviously it's going to drop its leaves when it gets extra cold in the wintertime. So you have to plan for these things when we're illuminating these structures, because there's different ways obviously to illuminate them, whether it's from within, underneath the canopy, or from the exterior shining in onto these forms. Another thing about deciduous plants, trees, they typically have larger, thin, and broad leaves, versus evergreens will have smaller, thick, compact leaves. Those are some identifying characteristics that you'll find. Excuse me. Okay, let's talk about plant characteristics. On this next slide here, you can see we're going to go through each one of these areas. The crowns, the leaves, branches, trunks. There's characteristics of each of these. I've kind of taken the time to expand on this thought as lighting guys, whether you choose to use this information or not. I've found it's important to consider for lighting. So for example, on crowns, we're going to look at the density of the crown or the leaves, how many leaves are on the structure, and how open the interior of the tree is based on that. So that's what I call density. If it's really thick, like you'd find on many evergreens, you'll have very little or no exposure through the tree. All you're seeing is the outer surface mostly. So it's going to be harder to illuminate that structure from within because it's so dense. So I've put three different categories, descriptive categories that you can look at: high density, medium density, and low density, and then I gave a percentage. Now this is nothing that's been published by other sources. This is something I've created because I thought it was important to kind of help to define, when you document these things later on, or if you're, documenting, that's part of our third discussion. You may want to identify how open the tree is so that you can determine how to design for that and illuminate it properly. So on the high density, for example, I say 0 to 33%, basically 1/3. If it's highly dense, then that means that's the percentage of openness, how open the tree is for light exposure. Same with mediums, like that mid-range, 33 to 67%. And then low density means 67 to 100%. So that kind of explains that. You may or may not want to use that, like I said, but it's something to consider in your lighting designs. Okay, now let's look at leaves. Leaves, there's different ways to characterize leaves or to consider their shape, the type of leaf that it is, the size, the thickness, okay? These matter because they are characteristics that may impact how lighting works on these elements. So for example, if it's a thick leaf, if it's glossy, it's going to be more reflective, and which will reflect the light that you're shining onto it, versus a small leaf that's thin and larger, maybe more translucent. where light can actually kind of glow through the leaf itself. So by understanding these characteristics, it's going to help you to design more creatively different interest aspects in your lighting design. So back to type, the leaf type. There's reflective, there's translucent, and there's absorptive type of leaves. Now absorptive, this one's a little more challenging because certain colors, what we'll see in a graphic coming up, are not very good for lighting designers. They tend to absorb the light more. You have to use a higher lumen output in order to make that tree, for example, punch more or pop more. Versus a light colored tree, it's going to be easy to make that stand out because of the light color. So these are all considerations and characteristics that you should consider. Size, small, medium, large, leaves, whether that matters or not, that's just another identifying piece. Thickness, thin, average, and thick. So again, if it's thin, it's going to be easier more to allow for translucency. All right, let's move on to branches. Branches, I like to look at two different aspects or characteristics. One is the starting point. Where does the branching start? Is it at a low level, a medium level, or a high level? And again, these are undefined measurements, but typically, you know, if the way I like to look at it is maybe on trees, 0 to 3 feet would be a low starting point. You know, 3 to 8 feet might be a medium starting point, and then high is anything 8 or 10 feet above. You know, typically you'll start seeing branching at those different levels. So that's something to consider, again, based on why does that matter? Well, if you're putting a light source down underneath these trees and it's right next to a low branching element, then there's going to be a greater chance for hot spots. So the more distance that you have between the light source and the branching, obviously the better. So that's one consideration. The next consideration is the number of branches. And I've got 3 categories: sparse, average, and dense. So if you have dense branching, which means many branches, then it's going to be a little more challenging to illuminate through those branches without creating hot spots, depending on where the light source is located. Versus sparse, you know, few branches, it's easier to hide the light source and you don't see hot spots as well. Okay, and then the last one is trunks or trunking. I like to look at, well, I call it main trunking, which means is it a single trunk or is it a multi-trunk? They're different tree forms are set up that way. Most of the trees you're going to find are a single trunk, but there are some species, you know, you think of like crepe myrtles, some Japanese maples, they all have multi-trunks coming up right from the ground. So you're going to illuminate those in different ways. So that's one characteristic. Another one is texture or bark type. I like to look at that too because that can create a lot of added interest depending on the type of bark that the tree has or the plant form. So I've classified that into smooth or contoured. You could also do smooth, mild, or heavy texture. That's another way to look at it. And I'm going to show examples of those in the upcoming slides. All right, so let's move on. Let's look at some graphics here so that you can see some of this. First one is here on this new graphic is showing the difference between leaf you know, types where it's reflective versus non-reflective. So reflective typically will have more gloss or glossy appearance to the leaves, and that will help to reflect light better, obviously. And then there's non-reflective. On the right there, you can see the difference. It looks more dull, more diffused, and it's non-glossy. So you're going to have leaf types that are going to range a wide variety of ways, But one of the things that we'll talk about at the very end, I might as well just bring it up right now, is that if you begin to classify plant materials, trees in your local area in advance, you start making a list. Okay, this one has these characteristics. Find similar trees and plants that have the same characteristics, so then that way you know how best to illuminate those types of trees, and then you can start building a library in your mind on how to employ lights based on these characteristics. It's important. Okay, next slide. We're going to look at this one, shows various leaves that are translucent. Again, where light can pass through them or somewhat get through them. They create a wonderful display in lighting designs, especially in maybe not so much like an emphasis or a focal point type setting. You know, let's say a level 2 or a level 1 display where it's lesser light, but you can create added interest by plant materials that have translucent leaves. Just like shadowing, that's another interesting way to create impact for lighting design. So these show the 3 different examples of translucent. Notice how the leaves are bigger and thinner, like we talked about earlier. Next slide. Let's look at some of the absorptive colors and or problems that are associated with leaf material that absorbs light easier. So if you notice here, the absorptive abilities here are in the darker colors. Dark purple, dark red, dark greens. These typically, from these photos, if you try to illuminate these trees equally as compared to other trees, you're going to find they don't pop out or stand out as much as compared to other trees because of these colors and the density. Look at the density on these trees. You can't penetrate in there very easily. It's going to take a lot more power, wattage or lumen output to make these types of trees pop if you're illuminating them. The far right picture there is some magnolia leaves, and some of the magnolias have a problem where they have a brown underside, which is like a hairy filament, or it's just the coloring, and this will display not well in landscape lighting, especially if you're doing uplighting from the ground up, shining into the trees, and you're trying to illuminate a tree like this that has this undercoloring. It's going to look dead and semi-ugly, brown, orange versus the green that you might desire out of the upper parts of the leaves. So take these into consideration, understanding the characteristics of these plant materials, and look at these things. Observe them when you're out analyzing your job site in the beginning. Okay, next slide, we're going to jump to the bark texture. Remember I talked about smooth, mild, and heavy, or smooth and contoured. Here's some examples where you can see the one on the left is a smooth type of bark, and then the other ones are more textured. So you're going to see different levels of texturing, whether it's mild or real heavy. Some of the, like redwoods, you're going to get deep grooves in there. These can create a lot of contrast and shadowing or interest. There may be, you notice the one picture that has the little spines off the bark there. That could be very interesting to create texture, just like you do when you're illuminating a wall of a home or a building that has a certain texture. Maybe it's stucco, maybe it's wood, whatever it is. If you get up and graze the light against the wall, that texturing pops out a lot more. It's an interesting effect or pattern, but you can do the same thing with these trees. If you get up and graze up through there, you'll pick up added shadows in there. Or if you side light these trees, you'll get a certain perspective on that as well. So there's different ways to illuminate this. We're going to talk about that in the next discussion, but for now, just understanding these characteristics and bark texture are important. You can use this to your advantage in lighting design. All right, next slide. Let's go to common crown types. So as a means to identify these forms, you'll find this in horticulture and botany. They describe crown types in the following manner. So there's full crown, spreading crowns or broad crowns, weeping crowns, pyramidal crowns, columnar crowns, and then fountain crowns. There may be more, but those are the most common ones that are used. And for example, under a full crown, they have 3 different types or descriptions for that. So the first one, full crowns are one of the most common ones you'll see. So they can be a round shape or a globe shape, they're called. And then there's also oval shapes and then vase shapes. So they're basically a configuration based off of that full crowned layout, which basically means a balanced shape and an even number of branches. That's what that means. The spreading crown, you see this a lot too. They're wider versus tall, so they're more wide than height. So, and they make good shade trees. And there's a whole classification. You'll see Japanese maples fall into this, oak trees. There's various types of trees that fall into this category. Weeping crowns. So like you imagine a weeping birch, weeping cherry. There's all kinds of different weeping forms that are out there as well. These typically have thin branches that droop downwards. You'll have smaller leaves on them, and they droop downwards, and they're fun to light because they almost glisten. You know, if you throw light up inside these trees, it'll shimmer, which is fun. Or you can illuminate them from the outside too. Again, this is a topic for the next discussion, but I'm just trying to explain these forms. Okay, next one is pyramidal crown, which is, again, it's more like a triangle where it's wide at the base and narrow at the top. Pine trees fall into this category, cedars, etc. A lot of evergreens fall into this category. So just understanding that is important towards, again, lighting design. How are you going to use, what type of beam spread will you use on a light fixture in order to pick these up without wasting a lot of added light into space, into the air? So that's the way to look at all these crown forms. This is why we're studying this, is so that you know how to illuminate them based off of one fixture versus multiple fixtures. Columnar crowns, which is basically like an oval but very narrow and upright. They are narrow, upright, short side branches. And you'll see like Italian cypresses are a good example of this. Certain different varieties of trees will fall into this category. And then the last one is fountain crown, which is narrow, upright, and the branching primarily is at the top. So imagine like palm trees. You know, it's narrow and it looks like a water fountain and sprays out at the top. That's kind of the image for fountain. So now let's look at photos of all these types. I'm going to go through this next. So here we go. This image here is the full crown types, and I'm showing 3 examples here. See the crepe myrtle on the left side could be considered either a globe or a round shape, but it's also a vase shape, which is, you know, kind of depending on how it's pruned up. So I think typically there'll be more of a vase shape versus a round shape, but it gives you an idea there. And then over to the top right, you see a large oak tree. That's going to be more of a globe shape. And then underneath that, I think those are birches or aspens or something. Those are going to be more oval shapes. They could also be considered maybe columnar. But again, how you define it, you know, you just want to have a general understanding of what the basic shape is So then that way you know how best to illuminate it. So those are full crown types. Next one is the spreading crown. And you can see these examples here. Again, they're wider than they are tall. So that's a classic example of it. These all have single main trunks. Some may have multiple trunks, but you can see how they're spread out. They make good shade trees, or they're just a nice canopy type of shrub if they're lower, like the one on the right, that Japanese maple on the lawn there. Lower to the ground. It makes it kind of interesting, something fun to experience within the landscape. Okay, weeping crown types, like I'd mentioned before. These are fun because, again, they're very thin leaves and they hang, everything hangs down. So you can see the birch to the left side by that barn image. And then the one in the middle is a cherry tree. And then the one to the right is a willow tree. And each of these is this weeping form. So they're fun, they're a little different. You don't see these they're not as common as the other ones. Next one, pyramidal crowns, like we mentioned, mostly evergreen, but there are some deciduous and forms of trees that, like that middle picture there, you can see that's a different, it's still pyramidal, okay? Yeah, but those leaves will be lost during the winter. And then next one is the columnar crown types. Again, Italian cypress on the far right, as you can see, lining that roadway. And then the other, let's see, the one on the far left here in yellow, that's a ginkgo, one of their farms. And then I don't know what the one is in the middle. But again, you can just base it on the shape of the tree. And again, how you're going to illuminate those. Last one. Okay, we're finally getting to the end here. Fountain crowns. This is showing the lower growing, more the kind of a shrub form or a small tree. These are the sago palms. And you can see it either just comes right out of the ground as a fountain, or it has a small trunk on it. You see these a lot in more tropical areas, subtropical zones. These are fun to illuminate, but typically challenging to illuminate because, again, when they're this low to the ground, it's harder to do uplighting on them unless you're washing light into them from further away. Best way is like downlighting out of trees or off of a structure to pick up the whole head of them, you know, so that you can see a nice appearance. Okay, next slide is again like a pygmy fan palm, date palm. You notice there's multiple trunks on this one, still low to the ground, but again, the trunk comes up, the fountain heads pop out. This is another form. Here's a looks more like a large fountain, which is this big date palm, big main trunk, and then these multiple branches that expand out. Queen palm or king palm, I think that's a queen. That's same type of thing, fountain. Here's another one, California fan palms. And then that's the basic different shapes or crown types that you're going to find. And then on our last couple slides here, in conclusion to this part one, we believe that if you study plant forms and their characteristics, this will simplify your approach to how to illuminate plant materials effectively. And rather than learning all the scientific names like I had to do in college for my botany degree, there's no point in doing that. You know, we're not trying to teach you to become a botanist or a horticulturalist, but understanding the concept of how to identify these plant forms by their shapes and their characteristics. It doesn't matter what the names are, you can illuminate things the right way based on these similarities. So that's the goal here, what we're trying to teach. Okay, homework studies and an assignment. We've decided to make that part of our designer series. We want to give you guys an opportunity to take what we've shown you here and now put it into practice a little bit. You don't have to, but this is a great way if you're trying to advance yourself and get further ahead of your competition. Then I would suggest doing these things, sooner than later. Why wait? So I've got 3 assignments or things that you can do if you're interested. Practice observing trees and plants by their common form. Learn how to identify them quickly. This is an easy practice. You can, every job site that you go to meet with a customer or to do a design one, spend a few minutes in the very beginning and just look around and observe what type of form am I seeing. Get very comfortable with that so you can easily now start to begin to put in the characteristics associated with that form and or the type of tree or plant material that it is. Okay, number 2, study and observe leaf types, sizes, and colors. Again, awareness is half the battle in this, knowing what to expect with light when you're dealt with these conditions, so these characteristics. What type of leaf does it have? How is the light going to reflect or absorb or be translucent to that? So you want to understand all these things in advance so you know how to properly illuminate them. And then the last thing, make a list of similar tree forms with like characteristics that's in your area, your local region, and then practice how best to illuminate them. So whether you do this by demo kit or actual live jobs, and you've been successful illuminating one type of tree that you love and the customer thinks it's awesome, now take that list and then find other trees that you're not familiar with and apply the same techniques to those, and you'll see that it works out pretty well. So that's the suggestions that we can do as a homework assignment. And then lastly, let's go over what's next. Okay. As you know, ELLI is making changes all the time. We are currently in the process of putting together ELLI Plus, which is going to be a video library of content on YouTube that's available to everybody. Now, why are we doing that? We want more exposure. We want people to understand, hey, this is an option for you to grow, to advance yourself, to become a member of ELLI, to do things that are going to help you that's outside of what the norm is in the industry. You see a lot of handyman guys out there doing all this, and they're doing, most of the content that they're providing all is based on installation techniques and simple practices. We're trying to do something a little more advanced to offer you a way to get ahead. So anyways, that's part of ELLI Plus. We, as members, we are offering to our premium members, which are the guys that are really dedicated and focused on learning and advancing themselves, an opportunity to see these videos in advance of everybody else. So we will share the upcoming videos only with our premium members, and that's going to be on how to illuminate plant materials, and then also how to document these plant materials if you're doing a bubble plant and you need to have that type of documentation. That will not be public right away. Maybe 6 months, a year out, we'll publish that. But for now, that's only available to our members. That's the advantage of being a member. So, anyways, part 2, what's coming up next, where we're going to dig in deep. We're going to get into how to consider these plant forms for illumination. So we're actually going to talk about illumination. I'm going to show you examples there, where to place fixtures, why you do certain things based off of these plant forms and characteristics. We're in part 3, again, we're talked about the documentation. This may or may not be necessary, but I would highly suggest it for those types of projects which are larger estate homes or have a lot of plant material, and maybe you're doing the job in phases. Okay, and what do I mean by phasing? That means maybe the customer can only afford or is only doing one part of the project phase 1. Phase 2 and 3 are future deals. So if you document the types of trees located in the garden or around the property in advance, now you have a heads up. You're not having to travel back and forth to the job site to analyze new spaces in the garden. You have this documentation ready to go, and you understand what the tree forms are already, so you're going to know how to illuminate them for whatever your desired intent is. All right, that's all we've got for today. Thank you for joining us. Again, thanks for joining ELLI. Bye. So if you want to see more videos like this, hit the like, subscribe, and notification.